apetito de riesgo y capital emprendedor para la innovación. José Roberto Rodríguez, director ejecutivo CoreNest Accelerator, El Salvador.
Juan David Martínez, Manager on Growth and Investment Affairs, OlarteMoure, Colombia. Allan, Jarry, Founder and Managing Partner, Jarry IP Chile. Facilitator Danilo Rodríguez, Partner, Espino, Nieto y Asociados, El Salvador. Good afternoon. I know that this is a complicated time. That's why they put us here. So a round of applause, please. Before I start, I want to tell you that the conversation that I've had with these three great people has been enriching for me. We will have a great conversation this afternoon, and without further ado, I would like to start, and I would like to tell you about the sense of the conversation that we will have, which is how companies need funding to have stability. We will analyze what we know as risk appetite, which is one of the variables that investors have to focus on at the time of making an investment. And perhaps one of the most important things is that these examples that we will learn about this afternoon, how can they be monetized in time, linking all of this with intellectual property in certain projects that somehow intellectual property is the core or the essence. Therefore, we will finish with successful cases in Latin America and the cases they have worked on. So without further ado, we will begin with the topic, and I have to say that we have been learning about innovation, entrepreneurship, and we learned yesterday the panel was about the need to integrate the different aspects, not only entrepreneurial, but funding sources, access to government benefits, linking this with universities. And in that sense, all of this integration environment becomes an important capacity so that this can be done. So to put it into context, I will ask each of them in general the ecosystem that they have worked on so that we understand where they have worked, in what country, with which projects. So Juan David. Danilo, thank you. Thank you to all of you who are here with us. And thank you for this question. This is a general question that helps us to frame this conversation and the intersection between intellectual property. This is what you do every day with innovation processes that are happening in these ecosystems, especially funded by venture capital, which is the subject of today. Some numbers beforehand. What's behind that? These are numbers related to venture capital in Latin America. In Latin America, just to give you a perspective, in 2024, in innovation projects that were invested $4,500 million. This is a round number. We will have to discriminate. In Brazil, half of these resources go to investment projects in Brazil, and 1/4 of that number that I mentioned goes to companies, Mexican ventures, and the rest goes to different countries like Colombia, possibly is the fourth receiver of capital in Chile. is the next in that list. So we can say from Colombia that for about 10 years ago, the industry of venture capital is becoming more sophisticated. We have over 15 professional managers, and thanks to success cases that you may know about in your countries like Rappi or other ventures that they have gone from the last mile where you had to make calls to being digital through an app. So what we do from our firm in Colombia is how we join scientific-based ventures. We go beyond innovation and we go to phases that are more disruptive, where scientific research is important, and the intellectual property aspects are more relevant. It's very important, but when we talk about scientific production that has to be protected by patents or secrets, the role of the attorney has an additional value. How do we do it in Colombia? And to tell you about our experience, we find that scientific research ventures were very few. And what did we do to focus the conversation in this world that we call deep tech? Is one of the important elements to understand what is happening in our ecosystems is to go and identify transactions, projects, research projects from universities or research centers in companies, and understand who all are investing in this, who have the risk appetite to invest and fund the projects that are in research and development phase. And there are some professional stories developing this thesis. So we started making some reports called Deep Tech Report in Colombia, and we found interesting results derived from a report made by the IDB and MAPS Latin America. And I invite you, some intellectual property firms should know this. There are players, angel investors, venture capital funds, somehow identifying opportunities in terms of health, but not telemedicine or making connection between patient and a doctor, but making investment in medical therapies, medical devices, things that in the venture capital world in Colombia, it seemed that it didn't happen. What we are doing is to motivate this conversation and generating trust between venture capital investors and corporates so that they enter the world of deep tech in Colombia and Latin America. And we have thought about this deep tech alliance. We have over 80 members, companies such as Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca. We also have local companies that are big in agriculture and food. They have dairy markets, and we are getting them involved in scientific investment projects, and there are some results that I hope in this conversation we can discuss. But definitely it is necessary to create ecosystems that generate trust between venture capital and scientific research. This is the experience that we have had. Thank you. Well, I will ask Allan to tell us where he's working and some opinions. Thank you, ASIPI, for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. And in Chile, we have been developing, and I say us because I've been doing this for 25 years, trying to advance the development of venture capital, investments, scientific-based companies, and the story has been long. Frank and Pierce, we have some colleagues that have gone through that. I learned about licensing, technical transfer, and I found out there was nothing. There were government investments, FONDEF, 869 projects with public funding for development of companies, um, and there were 0 patents in 2001. And this was strange for what I learned. Richie would not go to class. What I did is to form within the framework of legal studies that we had a consultancy firm. We went to universities. An anecdote, we went to a university in the north of Chile. We were with the dean, and we brought some people from Stanford, from DuPont, to talk about patents. In Chile, car patents, the plates, you pay a patent, which is your right to circulate for a year. Luckily, Americans did not speak Spanish, and they said, "What are you talking about? I have paid my patent." That was in 2004. Chile has made some progress. Now we have a potent industry, scientific and technological companies. There are new innovations coming in the digital world, which is where I am. There are unicorns, Butterfly, which is the famous unicorn, which is a company that was valued in $1 billion, and particularly I am with my hat of IP, and also with an investment fund of venture capital. We have invested in 19 tech companies. We are in the 4th fund in the silver economy area of 55 years and older. We are member of this golden economy or silver economy that has great dynamics, problems, things to resolve, and leveraged by the government, a government entity. Without Corfo, I would not exist. They resolve market gaps, the inexistence of venture capital funds, and they have created networks of angels. And so this is what I can tell you about the path, the relationship between venture capital and technology is necessary, and after many years is one of the main pain points of entrepreneurs. It's not resolved, they don't understand it, and the very few that understand it find it very expensive. Patents could be expensive, but there is a lot of support and many things that we have to do in terms of ventures. Roberto, with your vision in El Salvador, is going to be very valuable that you talk about your experience to ASIPI. Good afternoon, everyone. I know that it's a difficult time of the day, but I am very excited to tell you about the trajectory that we've had in El Salvador. And I am proud to be here in this panel with these great personalities that no doubt are changing the region and Latin America in terms of innovation, ventures, venture capital. I think you know that the transformation that El Salvador has had in the last years, and this is an effort, a collaborative effort. The government promotes, but the private sector, international organizations, they try to make El Salvador a competitive, to make of El Salvador a competitive country. And when we talk about competitiveness, we are saying that our companies should have more access to innovation, that they can respond to the changes and challenges of the world. We are in a changing world, starting from artificial intelligence. It's a new era. Those who are here, we interact with artificial intelligence, and we realize the potential and capacity to be completely disruptive. And what is the meaning of that? It means disappearing what was there before to generate a new way of working. And this, we have seen important cases, record companies, when Spotify came about, this business model disappeared, and now you have a mobile app with a million songs available. The time is exciting in El Salvador. In the last 10 years, I've been working hand in hand so that the Salvadoran ecosystem can start to talk about these startups, venture capitals, risk capitals, venture capitals. And this is something that Latin American countries, South American countries started to do 10 years, 20 years ago. They talk about the patents, deep techs. These are steps much farther than where El Salvador is, because we have started to see the startup ecosystem. I was in an event of ANEB, the National Association of Private Companies, where we talked to the companies, representatives of the sector, and what we discussed is about what is a startup. And a startup is not a company in an early phase. A startup is a business model in itself. And if you understand it as a business model, it's for us to attract startups. And I have been, in the last years, being the executive director of a company in El Salvador called Impacto San Salvador. Impact Hub is part of a global network. There are over 100 impact hubs, and they develop the entrepreneurial vision and generates cooperation. And what we have learned in the last years is that for a business model like Accelerator, risk venture capital, for it to work, these models are an ecosystem. For them to work is not only that there is somebody works, you have to have the academy, you have to have funds, the government, corporates, they need to understand the importance of investing in innovation. So it's deeper than that, than just thinking about a business model where you are going to create a seeds of innovation.
This is going to provide ROIs that are feasible. And that when we hear that, it's like we realize, okay, so it took 10 years to promote this business. And in El Salvador, I know that a couple of years ago with the board of directors, for the for what we're doing now and what in the wave that we're going to rise in the next 5 years, I was wondering if 10 years ago, if I would have started to think everything that I needed to do and I needed to work in El Salvador to finally do what this day, as of this day, we're going to start doing for the for the institution that I'm now representing, I would have thought it was a lie, that it was a joke. So going from a country that is completely unsafe to one that is completely safe. So, and if you've come to El Salvador, I'm glad you're here. I'm sure you enjoyed it. And if you've come, I'm sure you liked it. But if you come now, I'm sure the experience will be better. And this is about generating prosperity and about generating growth. And so, if I would have thought of all of the things that needed to happen for El Salvador to actually become the powerhouse that we want it to become, then it's difficult, but here we are. And we have a very clear goal. And make El Salvador the epicenter for innovation in Latin America. This may sound aspirational and difficult, but we've come a long way. And now we realize that for El Salvador, there's nothing impossible because you're making things happen here. The ecosystem that we have created over these years have the ability to bring in great capitals of investment. And like Alan said, I, as of 10 days, and so here I am as the executive director of the first venture risk capital that we're going to launch in El Salvador with the size of $25 million to inject innovation not only for startups in El Salvador, but also startups that wish to come from Latin America to come in and grow in El Salvador, because we know that talent is everywhere, and El Salvador is being reborn in this ecosystem. Therefore, what we want to provide to any Latin American startup that wants to come over and bring their headquarters into El Salvador is for them to have regulation, infrastructure, access to investment capital, and that they have a country that is ideal to launch a local business. And why I'm saying ideal? Because if I had to launch a startup in the United States and go into Rwanda proceed and to try to raise $1 million, and this $1 million is probably going to position my solution in the state in which I have to develop myself. But if we have to launch some sort of innovation in El Salvador, a country with 21,000 square kilometers, with a consolidated ecosystem, with all the necessary tools to reach the whole country, $1 million may even be too much, but so an ideal country to prototype new business solutions that tomorrow can scale at a global level. And that's what we're doing here today. We're here to talk a little bit about setting this path that as a country we have set to be able to attract new venture risk capitals like the one that I am now representing. And so I believe this is a panel that is amazing. It's great news that I'd love to share, because it's definitely a milestone for El Salvador to be able to have or to open a local fund and locally operated fund. And so these are not venture capital set up in Delaware. And that's in Delaware, and the holding in Delaware, and the holdings invest in local operatives, regional operatives. But the money is actually little by little reaching the other countries and the systems where it should. And so I just think that this is why I mentioned that it's a great milestone, the fact that I'm able to launch the first fund that is going to invest in local companies for local companies. And that is why the infrastructure is necessary for that, regulation is necessary. And this is why I'm going back to the fact that this is the best moment to actually launch a business or a fund of this nature, because we have actually built the ecosystem to do it in the last 5 years. And that's a little bit of an intro, but yeah, fun times. Thank you, Jose Roberto. So we know that funding accounts are necessary for the companies, and at this moment in time, just to go into detail, it is important that we know and that we hear in this forum, what are the different ways or the most used types of funding used. And I'd start with Allan, if he can share a little bit and explain a little bit about the different ways or the different types of funding, and if we can have the presentation up, Allan's presentation up, please. So, startups. Well, it makes a difference if they're local, digital, they have a path, which can vary to a certain extent, but overall, the graph that you're seeing up on the screen right now is more or less a typical scheme of how a startup works and how they move forward. And they start ordinarily with the triple F, which now are friends and family. And we leave fools to the side because anybody wants to support. We shouldn't speak ill of them, so let's just leave friends and family. And that's the first instance where, dad, uncle, auntie, cousin, whatever, hands over an entrepreneur $5,000, $1,000, $20,000, so they can create their prototype, set up their platform, their webpage, whatever they're able to do with that small amount to just test the waters out and get started. After that, we have an angel, and the angel is a very particular being. In Chile, we have some very demon-like angels that don't really get that what type what role you're supposed to play when you do that. But anyway, an angel is either a high net worth individual, or it's second, third generation of a family with high with a lot of wealth, and that has a more, and not even social responsibility, sustainability. No, it's just an awareness, a responsibility. And the mom, dad, um, why don't we help this? Why don't we create jobs? And so you have, the local angel that's speaking, that's doing so many things, and all, or an entrepreneur who hit it big. He did it. They grew. They sold, and now he wants to return back to the community. That um, angel investor ordinarily has the will to give and or to return to this community rather than earn money. Doesn't mean they're not going to want the money if it makes it, but they realize that it's a hard road ahead, and they know that out of the 10 companies he might invest in as an angel, one might make it, and that one might make it and might pay for the 9 that died along the way. Um, the profile is pretty specific. We provide lectures to entrepreneurs, and we let them know, hey, get to know this investor. Know that this is a type that has this in this profile, that they want to give, that they want to help. Because if this is not the person you pick, then you can get yourself into a big mess. Um, you know, uh, you know, so you have Jose Roberto, who's in the acceleration world. You know that this happens, and if you don't ally yourself to the proper person, then you can get into trouble. So then we go into venture capital investment funds, which can invest $250,000, $500,000. Silicon Valley, Chile, El Salvador. But more or less those are the numbers, and that investment continues to have a smart component, meaning we talk about the smart money, which means that I issue a check, but the entrepreneur should hope that this check comes in with intelligence. If I am in the last mile world, then I hope it connect me to an investment fund that knows and is aware that their team is well embedded in the last mile. If I am in an environment of medical devices, then I don't want to touch biotechnology yet, because that's a bit different, but that have that fund already knows. And this is this is scales in Series A, Series B, and Series C. And why it's important to understand all this scaling game? Because in each phase, entrepreneurs kind of dilute themselves. Yeah, they dilute themselves. They have to hand over a level of participation, and that's I'm talking about the Niemans. Well, because a lot of the times in when opportunity is being discussed, you don't know, you're shooting yourself in the foot and say, oh, here's an entrepreneur. I'm giving him $20,000, and I am actually taking 55% of their startup, and I'm taking over. Oh, great deal. Right? Um, but this is a so. This is why you remove somebody's motivation, because when you I mean, you wish this person was creative. You don't want to feel like you've lost control of your business. And if this business grows in the scale you're seeing, and you took 55%, there's no more space for new investors to come in. So you're kind of choking it. And those who know in the venture capital, when they realize there's a cap table. I'm sure you know this, but if there's any questions, of course. When they see that the entrepreneurial team has only 10% of the cap table, they're going to say, "You pretty much removed all the motivation. I'm not gonna invest there. I was just about to launch, and you just need $1 more million. That million is never going to happen." So the issue of who to invest, when to invest, what minute, what percentage to take is key and important to understand to the best when you're scaling up to different investors, and how startups should be funded. Yep, there we go. One comment of what we have seen, with these fund finding, and the diptych, and so sometimes we've been able to identify several different opportunities, especially with the Colombian diaspora for now. So many of our talents, um, scient- scienti- scientists, biologists, engineers, they migrated, and a lot of them were lucky enough to go to school in Ivy Leagues, so very top schools. And in these systems, it's very easy to meet people who can invest, but they really haven't seen opportunities to make investments for scientific research in their own countries, because it's really very easy to fall in the myth that there's nothing there. We have had some experiences, or the diaspora, some of our customers that are already trusted in us, and we have uh, offered certain opportunities for investment, and I believe this could repeat itself in other cases. And additionally to this, the C-suite or the directors, um, for very specific people, and because they're interested in that, because the technical side of things, we're engineers, and they understand the science behind things, and sometimes they can contribute so that this can happen based on our own cities and countries. And I believe that this can be a very important additional element of angel investors that Allan was describing. Jose Roberto, can you tell us a little bit about your experience here, and how have you dealt with the issue of funding, mainly of startups that have, that they're having such a hard time here to access? No. Okay. So this graph, love it. Um, it's really important, I think, to understand this issue from the start. When a startup is born, you can't think that you're going to be raising capital in 2 years. It is born from day one that you're going to raise capital, and it's born with know-how. And okay, how much should I dilute myself? It really depends on the evaluation, how much my company is worth in the future, knowing that right now it's not worth that. And so what am I selling? I'm selling air. I'm selling, and as I was saying, it's you as an entrepreneur facing the world at the very beginning, and your trajectory, your know-how is really worth it. It really has value. Your education, the ability to provide answers. Am I able to return, to have $1 million over my shoulders, and knowing that that money is not my own, that money needs to be returned. And so even if it's 5 cents, if it's $1,000, $5,000, this is a commitment. This is not free money. They're given to you to grow. I love this discussion and how we see it from the Salvadoran ecosystem. In El Salvador, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, sure, traditional business entrepreneurs, and also we have entrepreneurs with the intent of creating an exponential new business. But from wanting to do it to doing it, it's a big gap. So what we began to do 2 years ago is to identify within the Salvadoran ecosystem who are these entrepreneurial players that have raised investment capital locally with the help of an organization or just by themselves, because they believed, they went to study abroad, they knew the model, they came to El Salvador, and they came in with that chip inserted into them. And so these are the extraterrestrials, because they're the ones that can do it, and they have the ability to generate this exponential economic growth. And so what have we seen? In 2021, I'm sure that many of you know that this was post-pandemic. There was a startup in El Salvador called Ugo. I know you know it. I know you're familiar with it. This is a startup funded by three Salvadorian men, CTO, CFO, CEO, EEO. I'm sorry. And that was the ideal structure to have a startup, to have at least within your team those three important roles. And they were very clear, each of them, what each of them did or was supposed to do. The CEO took care of, from day one, attract capital, attract investment capital. My business is going to be exponential. My business is going to generate these financial projections. It's going to generate these numbers, and it's going to allow me to raise capital. But the CFO took care or made sure that that assessment, that evaluation came about, and that it was used how it was supposed to be used. And the EEO made sure that the platform didn't break down. So as they expanded, which at the end, it just make sure that this platform worked. This platform was acquired in delivery here in $150 million. purchased. Its value, 100% purchased at the time. So how is it possible that a Salvadoran startup in those years managed such a high level of success, highest level of success in the region when we weren't still talking about this? This wasn't part of our conversation. Well, they created a domino effect. When they achieved this impact, there were so many new startups that were born um, with this trajectory, with this impact. And casually, the most or highest valued um, um, startup is one that was born after Hugo with the same founders. It's the same guys. Is it just random luck? No, these guys know what they're doing. People trusted them, and after Hugo, Nico was born. But it wasn't only Nico. Hugo had been the super app that provided um, payment processing, and it provided experiences, and it provided delivery. Delivery side is bought by Delivery Hero. Experience, they created a startup that is called Fund Capital. Um, anything that happens in El Salvador goes through this app, and it's the same three founders. So anyway, and then they started Nico. Nico is a startup that has an evaluation of $150 million, meaning that in a year of operating, they sold in what they sold in 4 years with Ugo. Their learning curve accelerated itself. What does it mean? That in a year they managed the evaluation in which they sold in 5 years a startup. Now with a valuation of $150 million in their investment, with 1 billion transactions in their platform, over 209,000 users, and millions of capitals raised, they're doing what they want, Nico. Nico's doing what they want. They're convincing a lot of international funds. What do I think is interesting about this? Just last year, I was in charge of coordinating international trade missions in international markets. In May last year, I took 11 Salvadoran startups to an investments event in New York. And we were there and we were like, okay, let's see what happens. We have these 11 startups. They have a lot of talent. They have the ability to raise capital. They have the know-how of how to do it. Let's see how they're doing with the rest of startups in the United States, how they compare. And the answer was fantastic. Our 11 startups managed to raise $2.5 million in investment. Who were the investors? They weren't DCs. Why? Because El Salvador, small company, geography, and so totally right. But who invested in these startups? That was the Salvadoran diaspora. And so we know for a fact that we have a third part of our population in El Salvador, in the United States, and those people said, "I love it, young Salvadoran people," and they invested $2.5 million. Model started to work. We started to realize that the Salvadoran in general, when they are given the opportunity, they have the potential to raise this sort of capital or this level of capital. Once again, we repeat our story in Lisboa. In November, we went to one of the largest events for investment and innovation known as Web Summit. An event where over 75,000 people attend, and there were over 1,400 investment funds and so capital under management at $14.3 trillion represented in these 1,400 investment funds. So those of us from El Salvador, we know what our GDP is. It's $35 billion. Just in that little event, was $14.6 trillion. Millions and millions and millions of dollars. And what that does is this is a potential of the venture capital world. And our experience when we went there and we saw our startups, took 11 Salvadoran startups, but at the end of the day, we took 37 delegates. Amongst them was our Minister of Economy, Marilisa Hayem, representing the government, which is very important, of course. And we had the startups ecosystem. There were some banks, corporates supporting the mission. From Lisbon, we brought $12 million home. Not the two from New York, but 12. But the ones who brought it over were Nico. It wasn't the other startups, The other ones are, giving a good fight. But Nico was a big winner, and the answer was super simple. It's not that the others had not or don't have powerful models. It's not that the others are not doing important things themselves. It's just that they weren't born with the initial structure to raise capital. So when I saw this chart, it's very, very interesting because it really lets you know that when you begin a business, an exponential business, you know how much capital you're going to leave to raise capital in your different phases. You know this. You know this by heart, and this is so very important. As I said in the morning, this is, or from the very beginning, this is a business model because before anything, whoever invests in a startup knows that you can't really take 40% of capital from them because it's, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And they know that the startup needs to create an evaluation and they're going to invest in a future value that the startup doesn't currently have. And so the majority of people are always saying, hey, no, listen, you're selling air to me. Come on, you're selling air. That's your company is not, it's not worth this. In these markets, it's hard to raise capital. So what does a startup say? Well, hey, my company is worth $2 million. Yeah? 5 years down the road. And so for that to be worth $5 million, then I need a legal instrument in the United States. It's called the SAFE to protect the investor. Because look at what the SAFE did. A SAFE is equivalent to the actions that the startup can't give you now because their value is not that. And so it gives you a SAFE, a document tells the investor this startup, when it reaches its projected value for which you have invested, then it's going to give you a series of securities. But if not, then you invest in the evaluation that they told you. And that is a run against the founder, because what does a founder need to do month by month? Go above their projected value and not below. Because if not, what happens when it goes below and you run out of money? It's a headache for the investor and for the founder, of course, because they need to raise more capital, but they're going to raise it under a lesser evaluation than the prior investor invested, and that's going to backfire. But what happens in the other case where the startup actually raises capital at an evaluation that's much higher than the investor invested, in day 1, day 5, whatever, 10, when the capital is raised to that evaluation, so that investor already has the ability to dilute so that its security participation is lesser but will be worth more. And that's where the ROIs begin to be worth it. So a visionary investor can definitely make a difference in some of these models. And it's not just any type of investment. It's an investment that is focused on the fact that the startup manages to attract VCs capital or manages some sort of the level of success like Hugo did, because they got to IPO. In countries like El Salvador and Central American market, it's really not the exit strategy that we are hoping or that we're seeking for. The exit strategy, the majority of startups, at least the ones that we support, is to make sure who is the largest startup that still hasn't been developed in the region, and so they can become champions in the region. Nubank is an important example. That which you're mentioning is exactly what we're going to be discussing now, particularly with the variables of the investor that need to exist, and that we had previously discussed that we were going to start. Allan was going to start with these very important variables. So when we invest, what should we consider? We are analyzing 7, 8, 9 different variables when we're talking about investments. So every 100 companies that we see, we only invest in one. And that's kind of like a magical standard, because happens in New York, happens in Boston. As to invest in 20, we see 2,000 companies, and to invest in 20 in a term of 4 or 5 years. What do we see? So first is equipment, 24,7356. Allan, no, it's 100 million. Here's $1 million, here's a PowerPoint, and that's it. So I have a cave. So Saturday and Sunday, I definitely go into it. So when you go into the bank, So, and the second thing is that it's more relevant, and that is the strength as an entrepreneur. You know, the kids from Ugo did that was amazing, and you know, you're really going to do your best to search for that entrepreneur team to make sure that startup blows up. And you know, we realized that after all these investments that you know, we're doing 15, 20 years, and that is great business models and bad entrepreneurs don't work. Incredible ideas and then the terrible business models with extraterrestrials, world-class extraterrestrials, that is really going to work, and they're resilient. And they go there and they realize that all of the examples of success stories that we have, these are entrepreneurs, and these are the starters. You know, they're extraterrestrials, and they do it, and that's what you have to have, a sort of cat feeling. So just look at the eye and try to understand, try to generate that trust. And so one team, 24/7, 365, and that winning team, what is the formula to win this? Gut feeling. 2, focus. Cloud Store Argentinos. Have you heard of Tienda Nube? Yep. I was an angel in Tienda Nube in 2010 in Miami. It was my first investment. Unfortunately, it was very small because then it became a startup that was worth $3.5 billion in Argentina, and that was in 2022. It just exploded. Santi Sosa is the entrepreneur. He's a crack. He's an extraterrestrial, and he brought the Argentinian company total focus in Argentina. Just recently went to Brazil, and it arrived in Chile last year. So focus, focus, focus on that. And very resilient. This guy was about to go broke in 2016, and he got a bridge round in $40,000, and then ended up being worth 3.5 billion. And again, focus, focus, focus. Business model, simple business model, scalable. Scalable. What does scalable mean? Something that grows well. Everything goes well. So a consultant with due respect, a legal, I mean, with AI, things are changing. I'm sorry, it's not going to grow well. A consultancy and, you know, it's going to need more and more, I mean, personnel. We need a startup that can scale well, but doesn't necessarily expand its costs. They need to have traction. Traction is what we generated in this panel. This room is full of people, and that just means traction. That you can actually show that there are clients interested in buying your product. But that attraction isn't revenue or money or invoices. Traction can also be measured through other ways, like contracts, like downloads from the apps or registered users, so on and so forth. It needs to be able to go international. I'm sure we can invest in Chile, but we shouldn't only stay in Chile. It should go on it should go global. Conquer the region, reach the United States and Europe. These need to be international business models from the get-go. Another important element and intellectual property. Intellectual property, in this case, in the broader sense, needs to be completely organized. No, I have my trademark. No, I have these CL name. No, you have to protect your brand in every country. No, wait, and the name. No, no, no. So if I'm going to invest $100,000, you need to have your trademark. There's scientific-based, patent, designs, utility models, data privacy, confidentiality, all of these things. And so trade secret, organize the world, intellectual property, and come and have a discussion with me. So here we have a couple of tips, and I don't know if you want to discuss the issue of
Two more things, and then I'll shut up. Ricardo said, speak as much as you want. there is something entertaining. Generally, you say, show me your cash flow, your Excel, your VPN, and how are the flows and the forecast. With all due respect, the people, when they invest, they look at that. We have not invested, like never, in a startup for their Excel forecast sent by email. Never. Why not? Because in the 35 companies, I can guarantee that in no case the projection presented has not been fulfilled, or it hasn't happened. We see the fifth year, the revenue, the sales, how much is that? And we see the hunger of the entrepreneur. If these sales in 5 years, and with all due respect, we travel a lot to the north and south of Chile. We see entrepreneurs that are exquisite, but they are not. They don't have the mentality of conquering the world. And they say, "Well, what I want is in 3 years, I want my sales to be $100,000. Congratulations, how can I help you? But I cannot invest in you." But if Danilo says, well, I will sell $10 million in the fifth year, Danilo will not sell 10, maybe he will sell 5 or 20. But I see the hunger that they have, and this is interesting. And the value, well, the price. These are the keys to a car, not the Tesla car. They were pulling your leg about the Tesla. When there is a car, well, we can agree on the price, right? Public is, well, a house. We can say how much it is in dollars, depending on the state in the US or our countries. But a bottle of water, how much is it? In Chile, it's $1, $2, whatever. But how much is it? How much is a bottle of water at 6 p.m. after lunch, which was a bit long? Not much, right? And somehow we, in our way to invest, we don't worry about the price of the startup, but we try to define a value, and this includes the concept. What is your value and what is my value as investor? For you, it has a big value. For me, it's not that much. It's not right or wrong. And what is the right price when you invest? When you give $100,000, is when the value is okay for both the parts, and there is a win-win situation. Jose Roberto, entrepreneur, for this $100,000 could give me 12%, and me for 10, I would have given 120,000. If this value is decided, this is the correct value. It's a long-term marriage. There will be problems, and if somebody felt hurt in the process of definition of the value, this is going to come up later. So this is a recommendation for those who want to enter into investment in terms of price slash value. Yesterday, yes, two comments to add to the elements of how to establish the value and the elements of a due diligence in an investment. We had a panel about that, but in terms of scientific base and in digital issues, the exit and the exit projection, and this is a very important element. And what happens when we are talking about ventures of deep tech? The big opportunity maybe is in the unicorn assessment of the $1,000 million, but in the assessment of the sale of the company or the intellectual property to corporates, that is what they do, maybe helps the capacity of the venture team to identify who can be the next buyer. And These are elements that in Olarte we bet on these ventures and ecosystems, because if we do these collaborative investments with corporate that are going to make the purchase in the coming years, if this works, the percentage that it works is low, but we have a way out, or at least an exit plan that is clear. If we wait for the value reaches a billion, well, something important is to convince corporates to have the open innovation strategies that work for this type of investments. It's part of the work of the advisors having these conversations with corporates, because they are losing value and competitiveness. We discussed before in the seminar that the capacity to start a venture, well, the capacity to innovate has to do with the ecosystem and not necessarily with the capacities. We see innovations in neuroscience, which is pure technology. So this is what I want to ask. We were discussing how to link intellectual property to these innovations and your perspective. You told us how you see how we can change the paradigm in terms of these innovations, and I wanted you to explain this. Yes, digital projects, intellectual property is not the main asset. The brand, obviously, is business secrets behind. This is important, but it is difficult to stop receiving an investment for not having intellectual property in order. This is the digital ventures. In deep tech, it's the contrary. La union and intersection between software and hardware for power generation, transmission, storage. Some of you have clients there. Intellectual property plays a very important role, and I think that intellectual property firms, they must understand that game. What happens? You would expect that from the seed phase, they should have a portfolio. This happens in countries where there are incentives, grants, and non-reimbursable funds to protect intellectual property portfolios, and perhaps Corfo is a good example of that. In El Salvador, we hope that they have it, but in Colombia, we've had administrations that allow it, and some administrations have not allowed it. And the role of the lawyer, well, there is a crossroad. Do we take a risk for protection of intellectual property without getting paid? Because most probably you've had times where there's this situation, and it's very risky if there is no strategy. If we do it in an atomized manner, if there is an opportunity, well, we have many colleagues that like this type of project, or they are there, they cannot get income. It's necessary to have a reduction of the risk, and the example was in intellectual property, but the same happens with other corporations. They make investments, but there is no strategy, so they make 1 to 3 investments, and they are stuck with these investments. The model that we are trying to implement in Colombia, and we had some success cases, is through collaboration, and that every contribution that they make from this intellectual property firm, if there is a letter of intention or a future purchase of product, this should help to reduce risk in the investments that we are making. And this increases the value, because when it's a scientific investigation, we have to see the milestones. And if we are in a Series A digital, this is pure traction. How much can I make a month, and how much income is received in the business model? And when we are in deep tech, Perhaps we are still in research and development milestones. We are in TRL 7 in these projects. This means an investment of a lot more money than in digital, but we need to understand the strategy and make collaborative investments so that we can develop a new business fabric. We have very few scientific ventures that require patents and develop a new business model. Uh, we have to close, and I will ask you very respectfully, there are very important questions at the end. They have to do with success cases, but I want to start with José Roberto. We were talking about how El Salvador can become an innovation hub. There will be questions at the end, but I will ask you if we take 5 minutes to give the floor for the audience to ask questions, and we are interested to know the perspective of José Roberto from El Salvador. Yes, I think that the question is important. In principle, we have to believe El Salvador so that El Salvador becomes the new innovation hub for Latin America next to Chile, Colombia. Well, anyone could say, well, that's impossible. But we have achieved the impossible. So there is a mindset of ecosystem in El Salvador that makes things to start moving faster. And so the first factor, the biggest paradigm to achieve it, it is already there. El Salvador sees itself as a superpower, or the leaders that we are developing, well, we see it, I see it. And I walk towards that. And the evidence is the opening of this big investment fund. It will become one of the biggest funds of Central America. And we don't want just to launch a fund of $25 million. The expectation is to launch a fund of $100 million. How to do it? Like a prototype. The prototype fund is $25 million. We know, as we said, that a lot of this capital will be lost. But it is important to try innovation. From a phase called the prototype, because if this doesn't happen, the unicorn will just be Nico, but there is a good ecosystem here. Can we see my presentation, please? Because there is something I want to show you about the path that we have thought of, and it's not just for José Roberto and his ecosystem, it's a path for the country. And perhaps at some point you heard our president talking about El Salvador as a place where we can bring investments and we can develop innovation. And I think this is important. An investment fund works when there is a pipeline of startups are ready to invest on. This means that you have to create that pipeline, and for that, acceleration is important. This is a Dubai-based fund that we are bringing to El Salvador. Why investing from so far in the smallest country in Latin America? Because of the conditions. Because the country for many years has been working in creating the conditions, laws, infrastructure that is necessary for the operation of this type of fund. What does it mean? There is the tech law. Perhaps some of you know it. They offer financial or tax incentives. Many attorneys know the tax incentive law for risk venture capitals is there. Many funds will want to establish their funds and develop innovation. Now, we know that we are a small country with big opportunities, so we have to bring talent. It has to come from places where they are much advanced, and we have to have the capital, infrastructure, regulation, so that these innovations are developed here, because in thinking of their expansion process, if they have capital, infrastructure, regulations to develop. In El Salvador, they can expand to Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, or any part of the world where they will have a model that they could validate in a place who wants to be validated. Quickly, we were talking about unicorn startups. You all know it, everyone knows it, and we hope that this is a natural language. We talk about $1 billion companies. We are talking about Airbnb, Rappi, Uber, OpenAI, and they have achieved this value in a 4 years average. So a startup that grows always has to be thinking of growing exponentially in 5 years. Having said this, what is interesting? Look at Uber. This is our GDP in 2023, $34 billion. Just Uber in 2022, they generated $44 million, so 1.29 times the size of our entire economy. A global startup earn 1.9 our economy. This is so important that the capacity that an innovation has to turn around our economy 4 to 5 times. For sure, many of us know that one of the big challenges that El Salvador has is economic growth. We overcame security, but in economic growth we are below the region. But it is important that this strategy of raising a fund for startups, international startups, and give infrastructure, legislation, incentives so that this startup at some point in the coming 10 years that we have an Uber being born over here. So in order to achieve this, they talked about CVCs. That's important. They talked about it, the importance of injecting capital, and that the capital is not only capital, but you give extraction to the initiative so that this gives back innovation returns. This is the ecosystem of startups that El Salvador has. We are talking about 18, 19 startups represented. These startups have a valuation of over $2 million, and they have collected $70 million in investments. Take a picture. We can give you intros in these startups because it's the future of Central America. And we see the traction, valuation, the talent behind. We need women. Yes, it's important to empower women in this area, but this is what we call the la creme de la creme of the startup ecosystem. And based on that, this was our vision, and I will leave the team so that they can speak. And this is our path. We were in Lisbon. I am at the center. This is one of the most iconic pictures, and it makes me proud because 10 years ago we were embarrassed to say we were from El Salvador internationally because they call you gang member, things that didn't make you feel good. But we were in Lisbon in the biggest event of the world in terms of investment and innovation. We raised our flag and we said we are proud of the ecosystem that we are creating. And we brought $12 million out of 3,000 startups competing in 2024. 2025, it was a year of consolidation of the ecosystem, create the regulation, and there is a lot of collaborative work in different organizations, legal spaces, academia, government, cooperation, private sector, innovation, startups, people, mindset. The next phase was to raise an investment fund of $25 million. We did it. We brought one from outside. They would have their first investment internationally. And if you have a consolidated ecosystem infrastructure, you have an investment fund, an accelerator to accelerate startups, then you can go and tell the world that El Salvador, it's a hub of innovation. Come, startups international, startups to develop. And this is what we are going to see in the coming months, where we will have a big deployment to bring these innovations so that they can develop deep tech locally. And this is the intention. So, well, thank you. It's incredible how we are changing in El Salvador. Thank you very much. Juan David, you were going to tell you about the success cases. Two cases, they are marking a path for scientists that are entering the business world. They are few, but we hope that there is this development. In healthcare, it's a plant of blood derivatives. They make transfer of technology called life factors from a university in Costa Rica. The founder is a chemist that decides to invest in this transfer, and they raise the funds to make a plant in a free trade zone in Colombia and use the tax benefits. And then now they produce these derivatives and they are exported to different places. The market of this type of derivatives is sophisticated, restrictive, and this type of plant, what this allows is to sell in 10 times less money the same products that are in the market. And the other thing is they are close to a value of $100 million. It's an important number, and it's a relation between venture that it's a spin-off from a university of Los Andes, and they develop bio-nanotechnology for the reduction of the use of energy in the cold chain. The main source of consumption of power worldwide is air conditioning, cold chains in transport, etc. And this venture, what they do is through bio-nanotechnology, they save 50% of the use of power in fridges and cold storage transport. And the clients who use this technology, they can export the vegetables with a much lower cost. And what's interesting when we talk about success, from the first pilot 2 years ago with this technology, they are doing it with Corona. This allows for fast expansion of the product in Colombia. The strategy is, besides having the commercial sales, they are setting up shops as a contact point with consumers. So thanks to this technology, it can be developed because of the cost of having fridges to have the value proposal, which is having very cold beer. It can be achieved with this technology. Still, there is still a lot to do. We have identified over 60 ventures that can have this disruption capacity, and this can go to other countries of Latin America. There are many projects, and we can ask how to do collaborative investments, how can we identify this and not to make mistakes and do it separately. If we do it separately, it is difficult. Maybe the most advanced are Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, but the rest, if we want to get to that level or be optimistic and think that more projects can be developed, we have to do it strategically. Our firms and intellectual property, they play an important role. And through ASIPI, we should think how can we make this happen. You talked about Will the World. Can we go back to the presentation? There's the last slide. Of the investment portfolio of the last fund, we have 19 companies. In 5 years, there are 2 where there was a write-down. It means that the company didn't work. It was not the write-off, which means that we lost everything. It was a very low value achieved, and they are no longer working. And this is part of the startups where we have invested. And I have to highlight as a success case, Will the World on the corner. This is an extraordinary startup. They give access to people with disability in terms of travel and experiences. They go with a group of friends. There was someone who had an accident and he was paraplegic, and the friends take them to the Paine Towers in the south of Chile in a wheelchair, and they just wanted to do it. It became viral, and these two kids, Salvador and Camilo from Berkeley, they said, well, there's something here. Many people are of traction, and they create Will the World. They invested in a valuation of 3.5 and 4, and now the next round is 100, the value. So we are very happy. It's a good success case, and from the mark point of view, because there is no patent. They have the brand in many countries, and it's a certification brand, which is a Will the World standard for hotels. They certify that they are easy to access, and it's a beautiful business. It's one of the success cases. Both the kids are in Silicon Valley for 3 years, where things happen. So it's a success case. Another case, I don't want to only talk about the nice things, Simplo. It's interesting because it was the first investment, and if you see the Chinese sticks, they had the cutlery, fork and knife, they were joined. They are made of wood, not plastic, and they have suffered. It's been so hard, and we are just getting to the break even. The first investment was in the 2018. The thing is that they have patents. They protected things in the click and technology. It's not it's a patent, and it's broad and potent, and every time we make a new round, the investors, the only sales argument is, well, look at the patents. They are in different countries of the world, and they say, well, we will give $40,000, $100,000. It's not been a success case, but it's interesting to mention it because without the patents, it's not biotechnology or rocket science. It's been essential for the example. And I will end by talking about, well, there is a message that some understand. One of our main clients in Jarry is Bearfly. I did not invest in them. I made a mistake. In the world of venture capital, there is the anti-portfolio. He sat in my living to do the pitch. I said no to the older model. They have the brand protected in over 70 countries. It's an unicorn in Chile, and for a study is one of our main clients. So the message here, I hope you see this because there are support incentives important for a development of an ecosystem of El Salvador. Over 1.29 of the economy. This is what we want in our countries. To grow the economy, and the legal protection that you can give in your countries, and you have to adjust and open divisions of venture.
As far as what's paid, but ultimately that it's a big return like Petterfly. So with that, okay, thank you very much to all three of you. I ask a big round of applause for all of them. Forum is open for Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you. That was a great panel. Um, During the presentation, I came up with, I don't know if questions, but in Latin America, obviously, there are certain startups that have defined a deficiency that already exists in other markets. For example, Amazon, Mercado Libre, geographically speaking, so on and so forth. But then I started asking myself, well, Allan, and Notco. Norco, I think, is different to developing regional efficiency to a certain extent. Innovated. I'm not saying that Mercado Libre isn't innovative. Yeah, sure it is. The payments wise, we realize that Latin America, a lot of people have to pay for via WhatsApp or so on and so forth. So these models are being created as we speak. But I just think that the question for you is, how important is, the quote unquote innovation or quote unquote having patents, or how important is it to be able to clone an existing model for the region? I think that these are different investment thesis, Ricardo. The quote unquote thesis, investment thesis. Well, that's what I invest, what I want, and and believe I should invest in a silver economy. We're going to invest in a startup that conducts technological solutions for this economy. There are investment theses that point to copycats. Sounds ugly, but that's what copycats are. Go to Berlin, go to Boston, and Silicon Valley, and what's working there that is not here yet, which will be bought in 4 or 5 years because it's in the new region. Well, that thesis is perfectly valid without, of course, violating anybody's IP, because we're talking about business models, no? But there's also the investment thesis of investing in innovation. And Juan here may speak to us a little bit more the Colombian NOTCOs and that thing. And it really will depend on the type of investment that I'm seeking as an investment fund and that along those lines, and that I'm interested in doing. How many of the startups don't know the numbers, but are of the super deep take of large innovation or how are more incremental or copycats? I do not know. But um, so what do you like? What is your investment thesis? Thank you for that question, because as a matter of fact, that's where I think that the firm and where's more opportunities for us in intellectual property. Um, So when we move across to the world of venture capital, that's at Latin America Venture Capital Association, which joins pretty much all of the associations in Latin America. What are the main sectors where there's investment for venture capital? And then, of course, fintech, service as service, and e-commerce. And I know that many have a lot to do with the copycats that you mentioned. And so when we see health tech, when we see clean tech, those that have achieved large rounds are the majority copycats from intelligent platforms for patients, medicine, healthcare. And I just think that the majority of countries it already exists. As far as ourselves, we're going into the niche, and that's what we should definitely begin to replicate from within the possibilities that each of our countries may have. And of course, we have to figure out the opportunities for development cost, the scientific production costs in our countries. Um, So we got to be very close to the corporates, to the industries, for horizon 1, 2, and 3, and with that, just bringing in possible solutions. And as I was mentioning with Anna Freeze, they are being provided a new business line for IBM in Colombia. Then very likely, a lot of the projects that we now see that seem very small in our in our research, and that can generate that opportunities. But for that, you really need a lot of confidence from the corporates and the space to be able to present these projects, and that it's not so expensive to go into them. Because as I said, if it's too expensive and I have to make the investment on my own for this type of project, then very likely nobody's going to say yes. What we have seen so CP, you're right. If they're doing this type of investments, and something that we can promote, because that is basically the only way. We're not going to have a fund for $1 billion investing in scientific and research projects, and then the closest are Argentina with Girdex. I don't know if any of you know about it. Draker also. in Argentina. I don't know if we can qualify Sentinel Chile. So we're talking about patents, health, energy, and food. Something important is that deep tech innovations at the end of the day are the ones that really manage the greatest value. But the investment over time is longest, and so, or longer. It's the one. So it's important to understand that at the end of the day, to invest, you have to invest on something that's going to give you and within the next 10 years, but that the profit it makes and can be disruptive, so that there's going to be copycats of that innovation. I just think that food components are very important. I saw a model in Stanford that's called the Stanford Deep Tech Model, which I thought was really very interesting, and I just thought it's how they join together the academia, the basic academia, and you have the funding, the BCs, and then the accelerators. So these three actors, I think, should be working like a triangle. And so the academia comes in and works with the corporate, because corporate is important. And, after that, that's where the great funding needs come. And that's where the problems lie. And then there's a solution is born for, a real necessity. And there's a market, and there's scalability, there's traction, so on and so forth. And so, we have to go through, go with the doctor's fund for a period of time, where they're funding innovation. Where's the disruption in that? And so then you need funds aligned, accelerators aligned that have to accelerate that traction, meaning that those innovations. Because what happens at the end of the day, in the deep tech, like we said, the team is important, but maybe a scientist will not have the ability to raise investment capital, and so very important for the scientists to play in the role where they need to be, which is innovation. But an accelerator needs to, what they need to get from a scientist or a patent to find a startup team. A team that has a clarity of how to raise capital, how to sell my idea, how to make it easy to understand. So that triangle, I think, can help. And we're going to discuss this because as a country, we have a deep tech strategy. Those just not immediately. In 2 years from now, where we have already validated that this fund just generating some sort of return. But that's kind of how it goes. So it's from the optic of legal formalization and participation of attorneys and from structures that may be more attractive. I think from a standpoint of security and be practical. For that is a venture capital, an accelerator, a specialized fund, or even corporate groups that say in this segment, I'm interested in this, I wanted to go into this business. So what is a preferred format? With equity, because it's going to be with certain events. We have normal investor equity agreements. Again, I'm going to give you so much, and with that, I want to have a termship. So, in one of your experiences, where do you feel it's going to be more comfortable for the BC fund, to use one of these vehicles? What vehicle? And because that really has a lot to do with on the side of who is wishing to receive those funds, meaning what legal figure, particularly when the startups, we all know that this is a sensitive phase because there's a lot of question marks over that. So just a little bit, if you can share along those lines. I could show you just some general terms, and to do that, one, you have to respect the different phases. We have an investment, seed, and in that sense, when it's the valuation is not yet ready or in pre-seed phase, and there's an attraction, a couple of sales, or we have one single client, then it's very so then you have the almost equity tools. And so we have the possibility of establishing certain limits or certain discounts to possible future evaluations. So what happens? You have the convertible notes for 20, 30 years that have been more and more become more and more sophisticated thanks to the introduction of safes in 2013. And nowadays, you can make certain contributions where the risk is mainly the investor. And so that, what does that mean? It just means that it's kind of like an act of faith a lot of times. As much as we try to disguise it, it is an act of faith. And it is an act of belief in the team and what exists. And so you're doing this with angels, investors, friends and family. And I think an important issue that we've also seen in the firm is for universities. I think we're all familiar with the technology transfer agreements, licensing, profits. And so what we're doing, we already have some examples with the universities in Colombia, is that also to establish certain convertible notes, adjusted or personalized, for the contributions being made by the universities. And so you also have a capital solution. And you do it in kind. Co-working labs, programs. And there are certain opportunities to use these tools to achieve a solution for the issue of I'm not coming in as an investor, I'm not in when there's a university in the cap table. Because it's going to bring too much trouble for us. And what does it mean? A lot of times, in these type of outlines, the dean has to make decisions so that 20 or 10% of the corporation of their investment is generates certain decisions, and that makes it impossible for a serious venture capital fund to go in there. So as far as universities, I do believe that trying to personalize these convertible note aspect is very feasible. And as far as funds and corporates, what we've been doing this for 3 years, and we have identified that as far as corporates, we have two ways to invest, to make CVC investment. One is from balance. They hire a team manager, and they give them a budget, and they say, right, in a year you have this much capital to invest, and that is. And I think that's the most efficient way, the fastest way to prove this is going to work or not. The other one is create a trust fund with the manager. And so if it's in Colombia, then there is a regulatory framework for that. And a lot of times it just happens that a lot of these corporates create the vehicle in Delaware, Canada, or just any other jurisdiction that is neutral, fiscally, or friendly to these type of investment. And so, that's in. So it's different commitments, and a lot of times just allowing to make co-investments with third parties. So behind this vehicle or in the tools that basically are a sale for securities. I think there's still a lot missing, and just to wrap up, when there's an intellectual property in the middle, if we achieve a lot with what we've managed to make collateral, or what we were doing yesterday to title intellectual property rights, to make sure that these deals are intensive as far as investigation, and that they're more attractive for investors. So this is going to be more and more sophisticated. I think our time is over, but this has been a really, really interesting time, so thank you.